Would like to just welcome everybody here today from all over Canada today. And again, I'm hosting from Winnipeg, rainy Winnipeg today. So again, welcome to everybody. The training today is the Medicine Wheel, Indigenous Peoples, and the Cancer Experience. Today, Dr. Michael Yellow Bird, Dean and Professor of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba, will provide an understanding of the cultural relevance of the Medicine Wheel as it relates to the Indigenous cancer experience. Dr. Yellow Bird will also discuss cancer prevention practices and Indigenous population. My name is Catherine Yerkew, and I'm the Community Services Lead for Manitoba and Saskatchewan at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada. Since there are many of you in the audience today, we invite you to type your questions and comments in the question box of your Zoom webinar panel throughout the presentation. An LLSC staff member will monitor the questions. I will read some of your questions aloud at the end of the presentation during the question and answer period. Before we begin our presentation, I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society operates throughout Manitoba. We acknowledge we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota Iote, Denistulene, and Hethawak nations. We acknowledge Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge Northern Manitoba includes the lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Today's training will be recorded, therefore you can listen to it again on our continuing education program. I would like to share a mission and highlight some resources that might be helpful for you when working with your patients and families you're supporting. At the LSC, our mission is to cure blood cancers and improve the quality of life of those touched by a blood cancer and their family. We listen attentively and with compassion to the challenges of our community and point them to the information specific to the type of blood cancer or treatment. We help them get organized and to manage and take charge of their care, and we can identify services that would be beneficial for them. Visit bloodcancers.ca to find the contact information of the community services lead in your area. One of our most popular items for healthcare professionals are our tear pads. They have been tested with blood cancer survivors and agree it would have been a good first tool to have as it was not too overwhelming. Do not hesitate to refer patients and family as early as possible after diagnosis. We can help them prepare for what they identified as the most difficult step of their cancer experience, announcing the diagnosis to their families. We offer continuing education program and that you can join for free. You can register to one of our trainings that you can do at your own pace and receive an electronic certificate of participation. There are over 1,000 healthcare providers currently using the platform and 80 trainings available in French and English. Some of our trainings on the platform include blood cancer, palliative care, and psychosocial aspects of cancer. Be sure to stay up to date with our latest training by joining our mailing list. The LSC is passionate about supporting healthcare providers. The continuing education platform designed for the blood cancer community has proven to be highly valuable in providing essential education. Extending our commitment to inclusivity, today's webcast is part of our broader initiative to enhance healthcare practices across communities. In recognition of the applicability of tools discussed today, the LLC wanted to extend our reach of this webcast to a wider audience. This webcast will equip healthcare providers from various disciplines with tools and knowledge essential for effective collaboration with the Indigenous communities. By fostering a better understanding and promoting inclusivity, we believe that coming together at all levels is crucial to providing optimal care. Did you know that people affected by cancer experience at least double the prevalence of depression and anxiety than in the general population? That's not just at diagnosis or during treatment. Even years after treatment, they may struggle with cancer-related mental health challenges. The week of May 6th was Mental Health Awareness Week, and this campaign focused on making sure all Canadians impacted by blood cancer knew to recognize the risk, watch for mental health symptoms, and ask for professional help. The LSC has multimedia resources to learn more about mental health, no matter where the person is in their blood cancer experience. Our educational tools and resources are available online, vetted by experts to address the mental health issues. They include digital disease booklets, fact sheets, podcast episodes, animated videos, and webcast recordings. Visit bloodcancers.ca. Emotional and practical support is a priority for the LLSC. We provide programs that can help the blood cancer community connect. We offer peer support program where people can connect one-on-one with a peer volunteer and virtual support groups. Again, visit bloodcancers.ca to reach out to the community services lead in your region. It is now time to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Michael Yellowbird, Dean and Professor of the Faculty of Social Work, the University of Manitoba. Dr. Yellowbird is a member of the International Mindfulness Teachers Association and is a certified mindfulness teacher, professional, and has been practicing mindfulness meditation and Indigenous contemplative practices for more than 47 years. He's a member of the MHA Nation in North Dakota. He has held faculty appointments at the University of British Columbia, Kansas, Arizona State, Poly Humboldt, and North Dakota State University. His research focuses on the effects of colonization and methods of decolonization, healthy Indigenous aging, Indigenous mindfulness, and neurodecolonization, Arikara ethnobotany, and traditional agriculture, and the cultural significance of res dogs. He is author of numerous scholarly articles and the co-editor of 4 books and co-authored 2 books. His most recent scholarly health articles include The Cultural Determinants of Healthy Indigenous Aging, Molecular Decolonization, and Indigenous Microcosm Perspective of Planetary Health, and Decolonization Fasting to Improve Indigenous Wellness. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Yellowbird. Over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the nice welcome. I'm really happy to be here, folks. So what I'm going to do is just launch right into my presentation. I'm going to kind of move along, and so I've got a number of slides that I think help develop context to what I'm talking about. And I'm going to talk about some things, hopefully, maybe you haven't heard of, but maybe a lot of you are more expert than I am in this particular area, so some of it may not be a surprise to you. But I want to just, the whole part of my presentation is talking about the relevance of the medicine wheel from an Indigenous cancer perspective. I'm not quite sure what I mean by that, so I'll kind of figure it out as I go along, but also really it's culturally significant. And then I want to talk about some, cancer prevention practices that I think are very traditional Indigenous things. And I think they're very relevant to, a number of populations. So my work is really right now these days is focusing on the mind and the brain, and of course what happens to the colonized mind and the brain, and that can include a number of things. But what colonialism has, and this chronic stress that comes with that, how does it affect the brain and the body structure and function all the way down to the molecular, cellular levels, including epigenetic expression? There's a lot being written on that, and there's a lot of I've done some deep dives into that literature, understanding how it affects the immune system function, our life expectancy, and our physical and emotional illness and or wellness. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing right now. Neurodecolonization is a term that I've created. And I'm really interested in how one sort of begins to free the mind of all the oppressive sort of emotional, chatter in the brain. And how do you replace those kinds of very problem kinds of thinking, right? And so that's really what neurodecolonization is about. And how do we allow ourselves to engage in traditional Indigenous mindfulness practices that can help, build wellness, in our bodies and our minds, and decolonize and heal the mind from overcoming these damaging effects from colonialism and other kinds of traumatic experiences. So decolonization is really, you've probably heard this term before, refers to any activity that we can do to weaken the effects of the oppression of colonialism, facilitate resistance, and develop these opportunities to promote traditional practices in our current setting. And as you'll see, I think it has a lot of implications for prevention and healing of cancer. So the medicine wheel really is regarded as the sacred hoop, symbol of harmony and balance and the peaceful interactions between all living things and beings on the earth. You know, the sacred cycle, of course, you've probably heard this, birth, life, death, and rebirth. There are different directions and mean different things. And one of the things I want to say, a caveat I want to say early on is that, you know, Indigenous people are, you know, vary. Not everyone uses a medicine wheel, and some people use it differently. Some people have 4 cardinal directions, and people like myself and my tribe have semi-cardinal directions, and each, you know, having different meanings and teachings that represent, you know, our inner relationship with the earth and all forms of life. But it's in a sense, you know, there are these elements that it does represent for us as humans: air, water, fire, and earth, and these connecting points that we have for ourselves to the earth, to the sky, to the cosmos, you know, to all these different kinds of things that, you know, sort of make up our world, and they're the web of our consciousness. How do we connect with these things? So I want to give you an example of how profound and how important the medicine wheel on Turtle Island was. There's a cultural and really important historical relevance. Well, the first identified medicine wheel in Turtle Island in North America was at Bassano, Alberta, and it's about 5,500 years old. So the image you're looking at is, you can imagine, you know, this is the Bronze Age in Europe, right? Or a little bit before the Bronze Age. This is where Blackfoot, you know, ritual activity links the present, where people go out there with the past and the past with the future. This medicine wheel now is on private property, so in order to access it, Indigenous people have to get permission from the non-Indigenous owner of this land. We're turning down a little bit further south into Wyoming. You'll see this is a medicine wheel in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. And it's not as old, you know, it can be anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 years old. But one of the things that's important about medicine wheels is that, as you see from this sort of picture from the air, and this is the medicine wheel in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, all this area around, if you can imagine, maybe 3,000 years ago, where all these different Indigenous people were coming all across from Turtle Island and coming to this place and, you know, performing ceremonies and being in this area. We know this because there's been a lot of archaeological evidence that's unearthed a lot of activity there. And if you can imagine, you know, that was happening in Turtle Island long before Europeans arrived. This is an example of, you know, the present, you know, meeting the past, where people are still leaving, you know, like medicine wheels and different kinds of objects there, like prayer offerings around the medicine wheel, and also all these different color ties that have, you know, very powerful symbolic meaning to a number of different tribal folks. And those, if you take a look at that, remind me of the Buddhist prayer flags and this connection that we have, you know, with all of the earth, the sky, the mountains, the waters, those kinds of things. So it's a very kind of Indigenous way of thinking. Today, it's kind of captured in what would be called the sun dance on, you know, in Turtle Island. Again, the tree of life in the middle and all of the different colors that are there. So it's not just one nation; it's several nations that, you know, are practicing, you know, this form of connection to this medicine wheel with these colors. I used to be a professor at the University of Kansas a few years back, and where there was once a residential school there, it turned it into an Indigenous university, and you see a medicine wheel there, and of course you see symbols around there. Coming from the left side of the screen, you can see what is called a water bird. And so some of the tribes in southern United States believe in what they call the Native American Church, and the spiritual and mystical significance of what they call a water bird, and the connection to the water bird and its songs and drum and water. Inside the wheel, you see the markings that could be related to Stonehenge, as you see some of these ancient sort of markings and symbols, you know, all across the planet. And geometric patterns at the top and the bottom, north and south. So, you know, when you think about ancient peoples who are our relatives, who are our ancestors, that are very, very close connection to all these different kinds of things. We don't think about it much, you know, these days, you know, being in a Western industrialized world. They, on the other hand, were very steeped in a very sort of strong cosmic relationship with all these different directions. Some years ago, I had a chance to visit Colowee, North Carolina, and a really interesting rock that is in the territory of the North Carolina Cherokee, and it's called Judicula Rock. And as I observed this rock with some of the elders and the people from the community who invited me down, you know, they began to tell me stories about the rock. And it was very interesting. And one of the close-ups of the rock kind of showed all these different symbols. And this is from the late Archaic period, 3,000 years ago, all kinds of symbols there. So the one that always caught my eye was the one in the center of the creature or the being or whatever it is, you know, holding the hand of the child or whatever that is. This is my imagination working. And that whatever that being is kind of on a path, as you see, moving sort of upward. Then there's the circle where that maybe journey stops and then moves into something, you know, quite unique, whatever looks like a creature, whatever it is. And then it continues on upward, you know, who knows where it's going, but along the way it passes, you know, different kinds of things, like even a creature that has long ears on the side. So we can only guess about what these symbols meant, but from my understanding, talking to the people at the National Park Service and the elders and the people in the area, and of course the people that study these things, they say, you know, these symbols were all from a number of different indigenous nations or tribal groups that, you know, sort of left their calling card here and say, this is the people we are, right? There's one, if you see kind of to the left there, you see one that looks like, you know, a dragon or a man with, you know, or some kind of a being with wings running with a very long body and short legs. Then if you continue to go right, you see something that maybe looks like a COVID-19 virus, you know. Anyway, you can use your imagination, but I want to draw your attention to the far right there. The very far right on this Judicula rock that was carved 3,000 years ago, you know, by all these tribes up until the present, you know, well, until 3,000. There's a symbol there, as you can see, a medicine wheel. And it's the shape of, you know, most people would say that looks like a turtle. And you can see the dots inside the medicine wheel. So the medicine wheel is not like something that hasn't been around. It's very, you know, recent. I just wanted to kind of show you that across the planet, across all of Turtle Island, all the way from Alberta, all the way to the east coast of Cherokee, North Carolina. You're seeing, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, the medicine wheel. This is in the Southwest United States. And here you see a number of symbols. Draw your attention to the far left there. You see a medicine wheel there. Again, you know, these are ancient carvings there. On my own reservation and reserve in North Dakota, I'm a member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara nations. And as you can see on one of our you know, on our bridge there, as you drive on one of the hills there, you can see a medicine wheel. That was, and this is, you know, probably from the 1990s, I guess. I shouldn't say probably, I know it's from the 1990s. It's not ancient, but again, that present with the past, with the future. So the work that I do in my research and is I look at the medicine wheel, you know, in this way as being, of course, all these connectivities that are happening, you know, to a person's being, including the connection to the natural world, right? How we're connected to all these things, right? Whether it's health or disease, whether it's, you know, difficulties or, you know, good times in our life or whatever, are all part of the natural phenomenon of life. That's the, but I'm going to look at the human body just for a second. And there's other stuff I have about the human body, but I just wanted to draw special attention to the human microbiome, because this is what I've called the new great circle of life. You know, we call the great circle of life all the ecology outside of ourselves, but now more studies been done on the human body, and to know that we have trillions and trillions of microbes and you know, in our body as bacteria, fungi, and viruses that are naturally living on our bodies and inside of us, and those are a consequence of our evolution, and they contribute to our our health and wellness in really big ways. That's something that's changed a lot, with Indigenous people and with many of us. We have a lot of different kinds of gastrointestinal diseases and cancers, and rectal cancers and cancers of the liver, and all those things that have to do with I think has a relationship with the food that we eat. So what is the mind and the medicine wheel? The mind is about thinking, feeling, perceiving, and the mind imagines, it remembers, and it wills, and encompassing the totality of all mental phenomena. That's the mind. The body is really related to movement, and as I said, the human microbiome. But on another level, introception. What's happening inside of us? Can we hear the sound of our heartbeat? Can we feel when disease is moving in our body, or can we have a premonition to that? How about proprioception, right? What's happening outside of us in the way that we interact with the world? How are we connected to the world, right? And I think that's a big part of the medicine wheel, in terms of, like, as I was saying earlier, that those thousands and thousands of years that human beings have had interactions with the earth. What about the spirit part? Well, the spirit for me is, I do a lot of work in Indigenous mindfulness, contemplative practices, meditation practices, and I teach a lot. Been doing it for many, many years. But spirit also to me means the creation of meaning and insight. And I forgot to put enlightenment in here about, our state as human beings, and understanding, our mortality, understanding joy, understanding love, understanding hate, understanding all these different kinds of things that exist. And that, I'm sorry, that gets me down to emotions. I was thinking, well, emotions are really our barometer, I think, of our level of happiness, love, our fear, anger, or hatred. And also, what helps boost those emotions or reveal those emotions are situational, like oppression, or like liberation, or like, being in a place where you feel a sense of comfort, a sense of joy, a sense of freedom. And finally, the other thing I've been taking a really deep dive into is genetics. How do genetics really sort of affect not only our emotions, but how do they affect our human microbiome and our brain, and our being in the world? So this is just an example of some of my fellow tribesmen here, taken in about 1903. And of course, they're going around in a circle like the medicine wheel, and they're singing, these traditional songs, making a traditional sort of connection to the land that they are on. And then you see a tree in the left there, this tree of life, and the tree of life to them and to all of us was, a sentient being. And the rock there, kind of holding the tree that's wrapped up there, is also very symbolic of the anchoring of us to the planet. And there, of course, that's why the rock is there. It's not just there, showed up, but it's there very purposely, because the rock in our cultures, that's why rocks are used in medicine wheel, are a way of grounding ourselves, and remembering ourselves to the earth. And of course, the rocks have their own history, as I say, as the Judicula rock in northern Cherokee territory. Another picture of my fellow tribesmen here in the circle, having a ceremony with the tree of life in front of them. Again, these pictures are taken about 1903. Another one of our folks engaged in meditation practices, and meditation practices, change our brain waves. We get into those high level gamma brain waves all the way down to delta and theta brain waves. Also, laughter and or language also kind of leads us to activate particular parts of the brain, like the left prefrontal cortex. And on the left side, language center you see there is activated just by thinking about a prayer, or thinking about, having a discussion, with the planet, or with a tree, or with the water. On the left side under there, you see what is known as the insula, which the insula is one of those things that helps us in many different kinds of ways, but I'll center on this. The insula in the brain is one of the things that helps us resolve conflict. And it's very much related to also sort of bringing down our level of negative emotions as well. So a lot of the research points towards. So colonization then is this. Just like a cancer, occurs naturally in the body, but a cancer can also colonize the body. There's the invasive part of the colonization. Could be people, could be a cancer, could be a virus, could be a bacteria that invade, one species over another or one people over another. There's the period of contamination where toxic and harmful contact and interactions build. And then, of course, when we get sick, from the infection and the invasion, overwhelming the immunity, and also death and sickness sets in. Those of us who can survive the first three stages of colonization become the colonized. The ideas, the beliefs, the values, and practices of colonization, or we'll say the viruses too, or the bacteria, whatever it is, become part of our lives. It lives within inside of us. For many of us who caught COVID-19 over the pandemic, we've been colonized a bit by that too as well. I'm not sure to what level, but of course, when people talk about our bodies being having an immune response to it now, we can still function and maintain, this sense of being colonized, whether it's a social, political, psychological, or a viral colonization. It's really all one and the same. So colonization really creates disruptions and creates major changes. At the deepest level, I've been really fascinated and written about this a bit, about molecular and cellular colonization, which to me really enslaves thinking, action, healthy responses, and also damages the mind, the body, and the spirit. So trauma can colonize the mind and the body, and these traumatic events like colonization colonize us. Well, the indigenous culture, identity, including the loss of land, identity, and culture, are all sort of related to those traumas. We know now that loss is really a major factor in our. You mentioned earlier about Catherine, about the loss of something, and then of course emotional responses to that, and depression and anxiety. So when you lose a tremendous amount of your identity through the dispossession of your homelands, through these different really traumatic acts like genocide, land theft, and of course the impossession of private property, like I mentioned earlier, the medicine wheel in Alberta cannot be accessed by Indigenous people because it's now on private property owned by a settler. So I mean, those things all set into motion, loss, a sense of loss. Land, is really, in a sense now today, an economic and spiritual asset, that allows Indigenous people to, live and acquire and protect, natural resources, including the farming and hunting that they do. It's also very spiritually significant, culturally significant. Without lands, Indigenous nations lose their identities. They lose their pharmacies where they got all their plant medicines, their connection to that. They lose their markets and their foods, the place where they gathered and they hunted. They lose their practices. And of course, many have lost, their sense of purpose with the land, which is why land-based education has really sort of been making a big comeback. What about identity and loss? Colonization, of course, Indigenous people worldwide shared principles that, of their daily life and their governance and their relationship to their land. And what happened was that there was a deprivation of their personhood, their being, and their identity if they were deprived of their land, the ability to practice, their connection to the land and the culture on their lands, and to be in tune with the natural rhythms of the planet and the cosmos. So identity, formally, just a few hundred years ago, was really deeply embedded in that way. So does that follow us down genetically? Probably. And how important that is? Well, we don't really know, right? We're looking at that. Those things are being examined and looked at now. What about culture? The loss of culture through colonization. Well, policies and practices were used to assimilate Indigenous people into European, Canadian, North American norms that resulted in the erasure of their languages, their traditions, and their knowledge systems. Knowledge of healing, cancer, because cancer has been around, since the dinosaurs. Many of you know that. So people adapted to it, and sometimes by using different kinds of knowledge that they had, Indigenous knowledge systems. I'll give you an example. My latest co-authored book, co-authoring with 3 other people, is about Arikara, corn, and traditional agriculture. The previous book that we wrote was called Arikara Ethnobotany. So I'm not an ethnobotanist, but I became one by working with a colleague from the University of Kansas, who is a very, very well and known and respected plant scientist, environmental scientist, and ethnobotanist. One of the things that I began to learn from his work was that there were a lot of natural plants that, were very effective with addressing certain kinds of cancers. He's the white lab coat kind of guy that takes the extracts these different elements from plants, and then he takes them into his lab and he tests them, against pancreatic cells and cancer cells and so on. So one of the things that I learned from his research, I learned a lot from him, but one that always stood out was that there was a really powerful tool for addressing pancreatic cancer, and those are wild tomatillos. Wild tomatillos were treated like weeds by settlers who came in and just ripped up the earth and started monocropping and planting different, wheat and things, from Europe. But they destroyed a lot of the grasslands where wild tomatillos grew. Wild tomatillos, as I remember, have 11 different compounds, and some of those compounds can stop pancreatic cancer cells in the lab, just like that. And I was thinking, wow, I mean, Western science doesn't even have anything to stop pancreatic cancer right now. And so if you can imagine people for generations, ingesting and taking in and eating wild tomatillos, they're poison. They're like tomatoes, they're like potatoes. But as we evolved to eat those kinds of things and our cells rose to the challenge, we got used to that, and it kept our immune system stronger. And for whatever reason, it seems to have some relationship with the prevention of certain kinds of cancers. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off there. So what did in terms of culture and the loss, what happened? Well, in Canada, the United States, government systematically removed Indigenous children from their homes in order to kind of assimilate them into predominant national cultures. Residential schools in Canada and boarding schools victimized Indigenous children in many ways, including physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And of course, one of the things that happened is it created a huge gulf in their understanding and their connection to their traditional ways of life, their knowledge about plants, their knowledge about the land, their knowledge about living, their knowledge about spirituality. And this is kind of the trauma there. Killed the Indian, killed the man. This was taken at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, at Carlisle Indian School many years ago. You see all the children there, and again, you can think about generations in North America that were separated and began to lose culture, right? So when we start looking at, I looked at a scholar by the name of Kathleen Brown Rice, and there's a lot written on there. And she cited some people and said, traumatic experiences causes traumatic stress, which disrupts homeostasis in the body. And people who have experienced traumatic events have higher rates, and no surprise here, than the general population for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and gastrointestinal disorders. It's very true about Indigenous people. Indigenous people have, much higher rates of cardiovascular diseases, chronic metabolic diseases, like diabetes and obesity and those kinds of things, but much higher rates of cancer, much higher rates. And some of the cancers are more aggressive as well. Very fast climbing rates of neurodegenerative diseases, dementias like Alzheimer's disease, and of course, gastrointestinal disorders, which of course we know now that, stress and chronic anxiety disorders can actually really disrupt the human microbiome and increase the number of inflammatory Firmicutes species that exist in the body. So you can think about that. This is kind of the history and the knowledge, what's happening with Indigenous people. I was going to put the statistics in here, but you probably all know that well. So when I think about colonization, then I really think about it in a form of molecular colonization. What's happening at this deep level that's destroying, the body and the molecular, integrity of the body? Well, this is something that happens, to the brain that's under chronic stress. We know that, dendritic spines in the prefrontal cortex with chronic stress get broken down by a protein kinase C. We know that it's very important for us to kind of have a lot of little spines on our dendritic spines, a lot of receptors on there, because they're very important, for memory and learning and well-being, right? We know that a rich environment increases spine density. Now, this is where we start to come back to colonization again, right? Because Indigenous people had a very rich external environment that they lived in. They moved across the terrain, they went across mountains, across rivers, through forests, moving, migrating, interacting, right? And now a lot of them have been confined to reserves and reservations or in urban areas, which I think can help explain neurodegenerative diseases as well as cancers. We know that dendritic spines provide this cognitive resilience against things like Alzheimer's disease. But yet, what we do know, chronic stress, things like colonialism and different kinds of oppressions are really going to decrease the dendritic spines. We also know that telomeres are also at the end of the chromosomes are affected by stress and anxiety disorders. If you don't know this, and if you know this, pardon me already, but we know that telomeres are the caps on the end of the chromosomes, and of course, when cells divide, telomeres shorten, and of course, when cells can no longer divide, they become inactive or senescent. They're just sort of hanging out in the body, and I was really interested in that, and I was reading a lot about that, and realized that this is related to a lot of different kinds of blood cancers, senescent cells. And some of the new research that I've seen actually talks about some of the things that actually take care of the senescent cells through apoptosis. I'll talk about that in just a second, but it's very traditional practice that all human cultures did at one time that probably doesn't get too much airtime, I think, in your primary care physician's office. So we know that, the telomeres, people who exercise and move have longer telomeres, which of course is an indication of better health, right? People who are sedentary have, in this particular study had shorter telomeres, but the people that moved and exercised had telomeres that were similar to people who were younger. But the power of chronic stress and oppression, we know a bit about. They get short, even for depressed and healthy participants who are showing symptoms of chronic stress. Now we're talking about a lot of Indigenous people there that have these symptoms of chronic stress. They have a dysregulated cortisol, anxiety disorders, emotional mood disorders, and a lot of the chronic metabolic diseases. A lot of people smoke, a lot of people are overweight, a lot of people don't exercise, a lot of people have heart disease, diabetes, all these different kinds of things that all help, explain the shorter telomeres along with the disturbed cortisol regulation that the stress brings on. We also know that it's very, very strong, with kids that live in a stressful environment. One study I look at, I've got other studies, I'm sure this is an older study. But if you think about this, children living in the most stressful environments had telomeres that were on the average 40% shorter than those children living in the most loving environments. It's kind of interesting that early on that children who are being put in a very unstable, stressful environment because of hate crimes, because of discrimination, because of loss, because of all these things, and then those are the primary things. Then the fallout from there is then you have substance abuse in the community and violence in the community, which are all sort of the conditions that come from the oppressions that I mentioned earlier. So in effect, that we know that longer telomeres reduces the probability of getting some of these things like cancers and heart disease and obesities and tumors and those kinds of things. So we know now that the probability then of children getting cancer earlier those environments, just based upon the research on telomeres, is highly more likely than it would be for non-Indigenous children or any children who live in loving environments, right? So that much we know. We also know that, it's generational, it's intergenerational. Moms, we know from at least, well, at least more than one generation, maybe 3 generations, maybe more, who are exposed to life factors, shorten their mom's telomeres, and they pass those on to baby. So babies are born biologically older, right? Shortened telomeres, and the telomeres should be longer. So we realize that already, like all that stress and oppression that came from residential schools, from the loss of land, the loss of culture, the taking of people's identity, and those kinds of things have already set Indigenous people up to have higher rates of cancer, different kinds of cancer, right? This is molecular colonization I'm talking about. What are some of the current things that Indigenous moms have to face? Well, hate crimes, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. May seem it's quite the phenomenon in Canada, in the United States, but in Canada it gets a lot more airplay. I'm from the United States, but when I see the differences here, I say, well, in Canada at least it's on the map, and it's a big discussion. But if you can imagine, women who survive that experience and their families who survive that experience, or if, and how intense it gets when women don't survive that experience, they come up murdered, not just missing, there's no resolution. And of course, that affects the generations of other people that are still alive, the survivors. The abuse, the poverty, the isolation, the violence, the mocking of Indigenous people, the ridicule, these are all things that happen, in North America. You can't go down, a day with, see these kinds of things happening. Exclusion, stereotyping, sex trafficking, fear, the lack of safety, all these sort of tropes of hate and memes of hate that exist out there are still there. So you think about that, this colonization rolls on at the molecular level. What about decolonization? Well, decolonization is really then about practices of cleansing. And what do I mean by that? The work I do around mindfulness really encourages people to do an inventory of their thoughts and their beliefs and how they're shaped by colonialism. Those practices really help shape a really safe and secure place for one who's beginning to cleanse from colonization. And they build a sense of triumph over colonization, and it encourages a mindful confrontation with colonization. Like, how do I challenge colonization in this compassionate, loving, but yet very, thoughtful way? And today, some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, I think, that are really strong protective factors against cancer and other kinds of diseases include traditional or contemporary spiritual songs and practices like dances and meditations, prayers, symbols, all these different, ceremonies, all these different kinds of things that are meaningful to Indigenous people, or people are working on recovering that. This is my oldest daughter here. When she was about, oh gosh, she must have been about 6 years, no, probably about 4 years old here when we lived in Northern California. She's a little meditator. All my children meditate. But the last part is enlightenment. The period of enlightenment and decolonization means we're engaging in practices, mindfulness, meditation, contemplative practices that can raise our creativity, to resolve the issues and the problems we're running in today. We're birthing new ideas, using new ideas, thinking about things, futurist kinds of things, using technologies, like artificial intelligence or whatever it is we can use, all these frontier technologies that exist out there now, like machine learning and of course the metaverse, all these different kinds of things that are being used, the human genome in the decade of the brain have brought us to a lot of different kinds of technologies that can be used and so on. Well, so what are some of the practices? Some of the practices have to do with, and these are the prevention kinds of things now: running, dancing, and singing, movement, sleep, laughter and humor, collectivism. I'm not going to talk about all these today. Intermittent fasting, meditation, fragrances, hormetic stress, like the mild bioenergetic stress of taking a cold shower or sitting in an ice bath, for 5 minutes every day, and being outside, all these different kinds of things. The research is really showing very, very good evidence that these kinds of things are protective factors. Well, one of the things we know about running is that, it improves our fitness. It's part of our heritage, it improves our brain. It also helps, increase our mood, and increases our brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a factor in our brain that increases neurogenesis, or more brain cells, and protects our brain. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about, depression. No surprise that, depression is one of the main mood or, emotional disorders for Indigenous people. Very, very high, different populations. But we know now that, movement, like running, endurance running, causes adaptations in what was called kynurenine metabolism that protects people from depression and anxiety disorders by increasing the skeletal muscle kynurenine aminotransferase, in other words, CAT expression, that shifts away from this neurotoxic kynurenine, that we get from not moving and sitting, right, to this production of kynureninic acid. So it's a protective factor now. Very, very important for the prevention of depression. So these mood disorders, these anxieties, these different kinds of things, can be a result of dropping in the immune system function, and of course can lead to cancers. We know a bit about, the role of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor that is mentioned, the substance that is related to, neurogenesis and protecting the brain. What we know now, it's interesting that, a neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, plays a key role in helping, protect the brain from cancer-related cognitive impairment, right? We also know that it improves long-term memory, higher order thinking and learning. It helps the brain grow and protects the brain many different kinds of ways. So these are some of the things that I think when we're talking about protection from cancers, when I think about Indigenous people, the number one thing is exercise. You see grandma out there running. She's about 86 years old. She's out there putting in the mileage. Something she would have done already, living in the Southwest, is a Navajo woman, walking and moving across the land and the plains, strengthening the bones, the muscles, raising her levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the movement, also raising her levels of endocannabinoids, which protect her brain and deaden, pain and improve mood. Avoiding sugar. One of the things that, it's been so carcinogenic for Indigenous people, I think most people, is sugar. We know that, cancer cells thrive on glucose. That's no mystery anymore, but Indigenous people taking a lot more sugar, a lot more refined carbohydrates, a lot more ultra refined carbohydrates because of colonization, right? It's not like okay, you got a choice. You don't have to eat that stuff. You can eat healthy food. Well, there's a lot of food deserts out there in the reserves. You can't get those kinds of things. B, people can't move like they used to go visit other tribes to get, different kinds of foods they didn't have in their region. They trade. The movement was colonized. The lands were colonized, so people no longer do that. So those are just a couple of things. Fasting, very important. Mental stimulation, sleep, eating fatty fish, anti-inflammatory foods are very important. I mentioned mild bioenergetic stress, like sitting in really hot saunas or cold showers, that are good for all human beings, right? We all sort of adapted to those kinds of things, and we know that those kinds of experiences that we do have a very strong protective factor and really improve our immune system. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, contemplative practices also do the same thing. They raise our level of well-being and feeling, and also our immune response. Probiotic foods that all cultures ate at one time that we hardly eat anymore. Some people eat those. And prebiotic foods. I got probiotic twice. Like a lot of high fiber foods, very absent from our diets. When you see people come from other cultures that have a lot of probiotic, prebiotic foods, when they come to the Western industrialized world, their health suffers, in a big ways. Obesity sets in, they get heart disease, they get cancers, hypertension, and so on, right? And again, that's the disruption, colonization to that. So exercise is linked with a lower risk of 13 different types of cancer. I was surprised with that when I was kind of starting to do the research on that. I knew it was, but Carol Hope didn't write the study, but she was the person reporting on the study. Physical activity was associated with a significantly less risk of esophageal cancer, liver, stomach, kidney, and myeloid leukemia. Physical activity is strongly associated with a decreased risk of multiple myelomas and blood cancer, as well as cancers of the head, neck, and rectum, bladder, and lung in current and former smokers. Think about that. This is one of the things we do not do in Western society. We do not exercise and move enough. We should be moving 20,000 steps a day. We should be running, and moving, getting our heart rates up, and so on. I'll show you some more research here. This is something I've been really interested in, is the VO2 max and high intensity interval training. I still run, and I still do a lot of high intensity interval training. I'm almost 70 years old, but I could still run, like I could, 20 years ago. Not quite as fast, but I still, 20 years ago, I could really clip pretty good. 40 years ago, I was the fastest man on the planet in my mind. But the idea here is that the research is showing this, is that getting your heart rate up and doing this short intensity work can really, really create really high income outcomes. Studies have found that higher VO2 max levels are associated with lower risk of developing from certain cancers, right? What are those? Well, colon and lung cancer, higher VO2 max, and that's like running and getting your heart rate up to about 90, at least 90% of its maximum heart rate. For me, my rate for my age is, my max is about 150 beats per minute. I can get my heart rate up over that to 160, when I really work hard at it. But I frequently get it when I'm doing my max VO2 work, almost 95 percentile range to 100% all the time. So it's important to me, right? Because I know the research. I know that's something that all of our ancestors did. They had a sprint, and they sprinted for as long as they could walk as bipedals on the earth. They sprinted from predators. They sprinted to find food. They sprinted just to play. Sprinting is, high intensity workouts. It's in our evolution, right? So lower risk of developing and dying from these, colon and lung cancer, prostate cancer. What's interesting about that is higher VO2 max is associated with a lower risk of dying from prostate cancer, but an increased risk of developing it. Well, that's easily fixable too as well. I think one of the things is that a lot of studies have been done on people, later, who are later in life, and they start, doing VO2 max training. And of course, for some people, not all people, does it increase, prostate cancer. But again, a lot of the research points that you start earlier, the better you are. Other cancers, VO2 max, also is associated with lowering the risk of developing 9 other types of cancer, including head, neck, stomach, pancreas, liver, rectum, and esophagus, right? Cancers. Just to know this, that VO2 max and longevity is really important, right? It's not something that we prescribe to people, and doctors should be, because all the research and all the science is there. This is Peter Attia, who is very well known on the web, but also he's written a number of books. He's a very well-known scientist too, as well in the States. When looking at VO2 max in relation to all-cause mortality, we see a very clear trend. And he's done all this work. Simply bringing your VO2 max from low, the bottom 25 percentile, to below average, 25th percentile to the 50th percentile, it's not even the highest, is associated with a 50% reduction in all-cause mortality. When you go from low to above average, 50th to 75th percentile. And again, this really increases a person's longevity, right? Again, not things that we're not doing right now. So intermittent fasting is something I write about and I do every day. Right now, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I ate last night about 7 o'clock, and I haven't eaten yet. So I won't eat until maybe 1:30 or so today. And I feel fine, everything's clicking. But I've been doing this for a while. But research says that, patients with cancer also experience gains from fasting, especially while undergoing treatment. Here's what we know about Western industrialized country. We are chronic ad libitum eaters. That's why there's so much obesity. That's why there's so many diet related diseases, right? Besides obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, different kinds of, all kinds of muscle and joint, diseases and illnesses and so on. Anyway, I was looking at some interesting work that was being done at Cedars Sinai Hospital Research, and they're looking at exploring, and people have been doing, a lot of people are doing this, whether fasting diets in conjunction with conventional cancer treatment can help stall disease progression for even the most aggressive tumors while reducing the toll on the body's healthy disease-fighting cells. And guess what? That is being shown to be the case right now. More studies are going on. Emerging evidence suggests that fasting could play a key role in cancer treatment by fostering conditions that limit cells' adaptability, survival, and growth. Fasting could increase the effectiveness of cancer treatments and limit adverse effects. That stuff is all occurring right now. That's one of the things that, Indigenous people colonized, the stress of colonization, the availability of food, the no longer being able to hunt and gather and to move and to run down your food, catch your food, and to go without meals. I wrote about my mother. She died at age 94 in 2022 during the pandemic. But I wrote about her and her dietary habits when she was a young child. But she said it was very typical for people in our community, all the people in the community, to eat, 2 meals a day. And I said, what did you eat? And she said, well, he said, people think we ate a lot of meat. We didn't. We ate some meat. We ate a lot of garden vegetables, and we had chicken, so we ate eggs, off and on. But she said the bulk of our diet, she said the meat was the smallest kind of thing, and the protein they got, but they got protein. But vegetables and wild fruits and some carbohydrate vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, those kinds of things were the big part of the diet. And of course, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And she said, so, that was kind of like what people were studying in terms of calorie reduction, right? So these pieces are all coming together for me. I say, okay. We know that dancing, and singing also raises endocannabinoids, improves mood, and it's very beneficial. Dancing, raises endocannabinoids, which improves a mood, reduces stress and anxiety, and enhances memory, protects the brain. If you can imagine, during the period of colonization, these were some of the first things that were taken away, that were prevented or banned, and people were jailed and ridiculed in their dancing, their traditional singing, their traditional ways of being, right? And now they have, Indigenous people have higher rates of cancer, higher rates of neurodegenerative diseases. We know these things are not there to improve mood or reduce stress and anxiety. I would say all you folks out there who are working with cancer patients, these are things that we should know about. Dancing improves memory and focus. It's also been a survival mechanism, for people. And of course, it's part of our collective DNA, right? So people talk about that. There's some copy of people in my community about 1903 doing these bear dances. These were dances that people say, oh, they're doing some interesting dances. But now we know on a molecular, cellular, and a biological, and the biology of dance, what it does to the brain, what it does to the body, and how it protects the immune system. And of course, these different displays of power when you're doing these powerful dances increases testosterone and decreases cortisol. Again, these are singers in my community. They're singing and doing the things I was just talking about. They're singing. They're doing the practice. They're meditating on the song and so on. And what does it do? These are Bear Society singers about 1903. And again, they did this in 1903 only by permission from the federal government could they do these dances in 1903 because they've been banned. There was a man by the name of Edward Curtis who was documenting the vanishing Indian, and so he said you got permission from the government so they could do their ceremonial dances again. It's very sad when you think about it, because these are things that kept them healthy and well. So we know that their level of empathy is going up because they sing these empathetic songs to the bears and to the people, like, how life is a struggle. We should have empathy for one another and ourselves. But we know now, from the research that as they're bonding together, singing this song, and they feel the strength of the bear, the oxytocin levels are going up because they're connecting to the people, the love and bond with the people, the love and the bonding with the bear and the spirit of the bear, and the love and the bonding with one another as singers. We also know that their dopamine levels are going up, the reward chemical, because they can anticipate all the good things that are going to happen after the songs are sung, right? So we kind of getting to know a little bit about the neuroscience here, the neurochemical science. Cortisol levels are going down. And finally, testosterone levels are going up, and as a protective factor. We know that if we take a look at now and using all those things as a proxy, we know this is what's happening in the brain. The empathy circuits are being activated as they're singing the songs and they're doing the dances and they're doing the the musical coordination, and empathy circuits are being activated in the anterior cingulate cortex there. And oxytocin levels are being secreted when they're singing together and they're singing these songs, right? The oxytocin levels are going up. We know cortisol levels are being decreased there. You see that in green, and there's one green spot there, but there's other green spots throughout there. So cortisol in different parts of the brain is going down. Language structures are being activated as the lead singer calls out to the people, and the people respond to whatever he says. He may say that, all the world is beautiful. The lead singer would say that. Then all the people would say, all the world is beautiful, back to him there. So it's the call and response. But we know now from the cutting edge neuroscience research of the brain, when people are involved in music and movement and singing, this part of the brain is being activated. So dopamine, as I mentioned before, is being activated too, the reward chemical. So the resilience part of all of this then is that all the singing, the dancing, the meditation, the running, all the things I'm talking about. I didn't get a chance to talk about everything I talk about, but we know now where it's at. It's in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex as people resiliently cope with all the stressors and challenges of life. They do it together as a group, as a tribe. And you need your symbols, your songs, your cultural understanding of your ways of life and your connection to the land, to do this. So that's where the training takes place, and it's activated there in the left side, and it's not, the risky coping is on the right side. The decolonized brain is on the left side, the colonized brain from colonization. So risky coping now that leads to a lot of diseases and illnesses. So we know the location of this part of the brain. It's in the prefrontal cortex, located, between both cerebral hemispheres and the frontal lobe. The important thing about it is that it's really has strong implications for healthy risk, processing of healthy risk and fear, right? And that in itself should be an indicator of reduced stress, reduced anxiety, and a sense of homeostasis in the body, right? It also plays a role in the inhibition of emotional responses, like an over response to fear, that people are kind of in this space that they feel a sense of harmony, a sense of peace. They're cool, right? This place, they're not over responding, right? Like BDNF can be an over response in the brain and can actually kind of activate some different kinds of cancer cells. But that level of emotional response is even. The process of healthy decision-making and self-control. And finally, in the evaluation of morality, cognitively, what's the right thing to do? The right thing to do is to take care of my body, to take care of the earth, to be in contact with the earth, to take care of the people, to be generous, to be kind, to be empathetic, to be connected. So I'm going to stop there, finish my presentation. So.
Thank you, Dr. Yellow Bird. That was so interesting. Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm actually just going to go to some questions that have been sent in with our registration, and also a question or two from our audience. So the first question was, could you tell us the spelling of the name of the plant you mentioned that works against pancreatic cancer?
Yeah, it's wild tomatillos. Wild tomatillos.
Wild tomatillos.
And if you're interested in the scientist, it's Kelly Kincher. Kindcher. Kincher. He's at the University of Kansas. He's one of my colleagues, and I've doing 2 books with him. So done 2 books with him.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. So we just have a few more questions here, as I said, that did come in with our registration. What is the Indigenous perspective on chemotherapy as a cancer treatment?
You know, I couldn't give the Indigenous perspective, because there are many different, you know, people that would say that. But I would say that, you know, a lot of people depend on their doctor, you know, to make the right decision. You know, and a lot of people have it. Would I do it personally? No, I wouldn't do it personally. I know too much about chemotherapy, and I know too much about, you know, all the other systems. I think chemotherapy, if I did it, I would certainly be doing it in a fasted state, you know, and doing all the things that I need to do that probably, you know, your surgeon, your doctor wouldn't be recommending. Maybe they would, but you know, I don't know if there's one on there. You know, there's one such belief system. You know, so.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So have you found any differences in how different age ranges from youth, young adults engage with the medicine wheel teachings?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's something that's presented to folks, and I think, you know, the examples are different of the mind, the body, the spirit, and the emotions. And so, you know, it's kind of universal in the sense of positivity, but, you know, for youth, you might say, you know, think good thoughts, you know, think happy thoughts, you know, have compassion for others. You know, the body, you know, you know, probably would, you know, for the way someone teaches it, you know, I can find value of movement for every, you know, everyone from a baby to, you know, the oldest adult, the oldest elder, right? So I think it's, I think, you know, people sort of, you know, architect it in a way that makes sense for each group. But I don't, you know, and people do that for different age groups. So, and you can find that information too. So.
Okay. So Indigenous peoples have a variety of practices and beliefs. So is what you're teaching applicable to all Indigenous peoples?
I think it's, you know, personally, I think it's, it is relevant to all people. I mean, it's going to be more relevant, I think, to Indigenous people in some cases, because genetically and evolutionarily speaking, you know, many of us are closer to that, to our ancestors just a few hundred years ago when they were hunter-gatherers. Those of you that are farmers can go back to 12,000 years ago when, you know, over those 12,000 years, you know, you may have had different mutations happening in your genetic profile, in your blueprint. So it may be different. But most of the research seems to indicate, you know, that things that I've talked about are good for all populations. It's just that, you know, fasting may have a stronger effect in some populations and a more, you know, disadvantaged effect in some populations. It's all kind of, right now, it's all kind of under study. My belief, again, is that folks who have a genetic sort of profile that's closer to some of these things like fasting, you know, that people did all the time, you know, have developed the necessary metabolic responses, as well as the cellular and molecular sort of systems that exist in the body, as well as you know, not only the biology, but they also have the DNA for some of those things. We know, for example, humor, for example, you know, is based upon genetics. Happiness and mood is partly, you know, based on genetics. So I would think that fasting and running and all those kinds of things is also partly based on genetics. The good thing to remember is that most of us are going to fall in the middle. You know, our genes are going to fall in the middle. The outliers are going to be the people that live, you know, to be 110 years old, and they can smoke, you know, cigars every day and drink, you know, a liter of bourbon every evening, right? And they're still going to live to be 110. Those are the outliers. The outliers on this side, again, it's a very small number, are people that are going to have, you know, outcomes and not maybe do well. You know, most of us, you know, 90%, 95% of the people live, in the middle. So we have so much control over our destiny, you know, by what we eat, how we think, how we exercise, how we, you know, how we interact with others and so on.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you once again, Dr. Yellow Bird, for being here with us today. We're going to close off our presentation, and I would like to thank our sponsors. This event was made possible by AbbVie and Gilead Kite. I would like to remind everyone that we are here for the blood cancer community. Do not hesitate to order our tear pad for free, or to contact us if you need more information or support. Please note that a short survey will be sent to all participants after this webcast. We would greatly appreciate you taking a moment to fill it in, as it will help us to offer you the most valuable information. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.